Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now today, we're going to tackle a topic that I suspect will resonate with every single person listening in 165 countries where you all reside. And that topic is technical debt. Now, in a nutshell, technical debt is the cost of additional work caused by choosing an easy solution over a better approach that would take longer. And let's be honest, I think we've all seen examples like that in the workplace. And it's something that is impacting a huge number of organisations, especially in the wake of all the disruption we've seen in recent years. But while it was likely born out of necessity, if these burdens from the past are not addressed, the repercussions for your future could be severe, as shown by the fact that every hour spent on innovation, organisations often spend 3 hours tackling technical debt. And even more worrying is the recent study that revealed 68% of organisations believe that their technical debt would continue to increase in 2022. So to try and make sense of this trend, I invited Carey Blunt, Global Head at ServiceNow Solutions at Fujitsu, to join me today on the podcast in a conversation about diagnosing these symptoms and the solutions of technical debt. And Carey has nearly 20 years' experience of working in demanding IT environments across many industry verticals and technologies. He currently specialises in running teams who are consulting on, designing and developing and implementing front-end focused service management tools such as ServiceNow. And as someone right in the heart of all this and talking with clients all over the world, I know technical debt is a subject very close to his heart. So buckle up and hold on tight, because wherever you're located in the world, it's time for me to beam your ears all the way to Manchester here in the UK, where Carey Blunt, Global Head of ServiceNow Solutions at Fujitsu, he's waiting to talk about all things related to technical debt. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Hi. Thanks. Great to be here. My name's Carey. Carey Blunt. I work for Fujitsu. I'm part of our global ServiceNow organization and have responsibility for some of our software development teams. So delighted to be here to talk about agile things and technical debt.
And it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast today, Carey, because each day what I try to do here is demystify technology and help stakeholders, decision makers and people outside of IT speak and understand the same language. And today I want to tackle that topic of technical debt, which I think is a hot topic in every organisation right now. But just to set the scene, can you provide a brief overview of what is meant when we say technical debt?
Yeah, sure. Technical debt is a term we often associate with Agile and Agile Scrum. It's a very clever metaphor, really, in that what we're doing here is likening something like financial debt to technical practices. So if you take a loan of money, then you've got to pay that loan back. And while you're paying it back, you'll probably have to pay interest. When we talk about technical debt, we mean if we're working on a bit of software or developing something and we take a shortcut in order to do something maybe quicker or maybe cheaper, or we do something that is wrong, we have accrued some debt that we will have to pay back at some point. So the idea being that, anytime you're making one of these shortcuts, then that debt is sat on your books and you have to pay that back at some point else in your software development cycle.
And I'm curious, at Fujitsu, you're going to be working and talking with businesses all over the world. So as someone that's having a lot of conversations with different organisations, how have you seen this debt currently impact organisations? And I'm also curious, has the situation changed over the last 2 years?
Yeah, there's a few things, I guess, that have changed a little bit over the last 2 years. So whenever I talk to a customer about technical debt, really I'm putting that technical debt into one of three buckets. So if you read the textbooks, they'll talk about what's called naive technical debt, which is where you make a mistake or you make a decision that causes you to accrue some technical debt. So let's make the example. Let's say we decide to hire some junior developers to do a bit of work when we know maybe we need senior developers to do it. Or we decide to cut our testing cycle down from 4 weeks to 1 week because we're trying to hit a deadline. Then those decisions accrue some technical debt in the background. So that would be an example of naive technical debt. Then we have some things like unavoidable technical debt. So that would be where something changes that you don't have any control over, but as a result causes you some work that you need to do, some debt you have to pay back. An example of that might be you're interacting with an API or some sort of cloud service, and it changes the way it works, and your code has to change in order to match it. Then that's something you didn't know about. It's not under your control, but you've, as a result, had some technical debt. And then the third one is strategic technical debt. So that's where you are making a strategic decision to accrue some debt in order to save you something in the future. So if I want to buy a new car, I can either save up for it for 3 years, or I can get a loan of money and get that car sooner. So I'm taking on a debt in order to get what I want quicker. And the same is true for technical development. I can choose to take some shortcuts in order to get where I want quicker or cheaper, but I'm going to have to pay that back. But if you do it in the right way, in the way you know how you're going to pay that back again, then actually it's a tool. So when I talk to customers about it, I'm trying to work out of the technical debt that they're building, how much of it is naive technical debt, how much is unavoidable, and how much is strategic. And trying to work with them to understand how they can have strategic technical debt, which is sort of the best type you can get, and how they can cut down on their naive technical debt particularly. So those are things that I would always want to sort of talk to a customer about when we're having a conversation like that. And when you put it in the context of the last 2 years, of course, due to the pandemic and things like that, teams have got a lot more geographically dispersed. Our ways of working have changed. There's a lot less people sort of meeting in offices, and development teams are even more dispersed than they were before. Now I believe in dispersed teams, and I think that can mostly be a good thing. But the lack of communication between sort of members of a software development team, for example, or any sort of agile team might have accrued some additional technical debt over the last 2 years because of the change in circumstances.
Absolutely, because it would have been almost exactly 2 years ago that many businesses were forced to almost embrace remote working at scale overnight, didn't they? And, are you seeing a lot of debt because of that?
Absolutely, yeah. I think there are some. Everything's a trade-off, right? So There are some trade-offs that got made as for really good reasons, right? So I mean, technical debt sounds like a really bad thing. You know, the word debt has a lot of negative connotations to it, but actually, if you think of it as a strategic tool, then it can be a good thing. And essentially what organizations have done is have made a trade-off, maybe for the well-being of their people, which was absolutely worth making, but has accrued some technical debt. And now organizations maybe are thinking about how they will need to pay that back.
And for any business leader listening, how easy is it to spot technical debt and identify it? What are the main things that they should be looking out for that maybe will make everyone listening start nodding their head as soon as you start mentioning them? Is there anything that really springs to mind?
Yeah, there's a few things. I suppose there's things that are happening on the ground floor, and then there's the question you asked about how do business leaders find out about that? Yeah. And there's a couple of things. So, I mean, if you're asking the teams on the ground floor, they'll see that there's probably maybe some what I would call ugly looking defects in their backlog of work that no one ever seems to get around to fixing. And it's probably because they've got a lot of technical debt associated with them. You could say to a developer, why do we never get around to fixing this defect? Why do we never put it in the next sprint? And they'll say, well, I know if I fix that, I'm going to have to fix a whole bunch of other things where we made a bunch of decisions last year, and it's going to be a really big job, and I don't really fancy doing it at the moment. It's going to take a lot of time and effort. And so those things are sometimes a good indicator that there's a lot of technical debt to repay there. But from a business leader point of view, they will start to see a couple of things potentially. So they'll see probably a slowing in the velocity of whatever they're trying to do, in the speed of what they're trying to do, almost an unexplained loss of speed, and at the same time sometimes an increase in cost. And they'll say, so, we were doing these things, we were putting a release out every 2 months, and now it seems to be 3 months and it's costing me more. Why is that? And they also might see a corresponding sense of frustration from their users. So quite often you can speak to your users, your customers, whether they're internal or external, and get a sense of frustration. Maybe the system is always changing, it's always changing much more frequently than it needs to. Maybe there are more bugs and defects getting found. Maybe sometimes there's a release and it looks like it's gone backwards. And those things will cause the customer's dissatisfaction, and then that will feed back into, and business leaders should be able to spot that. Sometimes it's a pretty subtle thing, but often when you keep asking why and you keep chasing back to the root cause, it will be due to some buildup of technical debt.
So once it's been diagnosed and identified that there is a problem there, just how important is it to try and manage that debt? And what are the implications of failing to do so, getting lost in firefighting and keeping the lights on, and that awful phrase that we often hear in business, well, it is what it is. What happens if you fail to manage that debt?
Yeah, well, ultimately, and I keep drawing these sort of parallels back to the financial debt, because the analogy is so good, is that ultimately, if you start to get a lot of financial debt, you've kind of got there's only three things you can really do. One is sort of stick your head in the sand and pretend it's not there and do nothing. So I guess that's a little bit more to your, well, it is what it is point. But you are implicitly in the background, while you might be trying to ignore it, you are accruing interest on that debt. You can, alternatively, your second option is to work harder to pay off the debt, right? So try to get more done, try to find a way to service that loan better. And then the only other option you've really got is kind of to declare bankruptcy in a financial terms, and take some sort of big option. So in a technical equivalent of that would be just getting to such a point with a product, a bit of software or whatever you're developing, you go, it's just not worth carrying on anymore. We've got, it's so difficult to work, it's so difficult to change, that actually we'd be better off throwing it away and building something new or buying something from someone else. So ultimately you can get, if we talk about financial debt, people use phrases like sort of drowning in their own debt or crushed by the weight of the burden of their debt. The same can become true of technical debt as well. So if you're not managing it, then you are slowly progressing towards a point where you have to do something that's uncomfortable for everyone, either work harder to pay that off in a really intensive way, or to declare bankruptcy and do something different.
And I apologise to every business leader listening, but as an ex-IT guy, I automatically go back to that way of thinking. And how can IT workflows actually help organisations to overcome this level of technical debt?
I think it all comes down to good practices. So if you are a good development team with good practices, so good testing practices, automated testing, good control, good processes, then that will stop you adding more naive technical debt. So you won't have to cut as many corners. You won't have to do things that hit a deadline, which are suboptimal, because your practices will have teed you up for that in advance. And so your IT workflows absolutely help you to overcome debt by introducing good working practices to your teams. Things like having a good, strong definition of what done means, what good looks like for the things you're developing, is something that can be enforced by your IT workflows and which will cause you not to accrue more debt. And I always think that it gives you a better understanding of your, I guess, debt economics, right? So your financial debts will be well understood, but your technical debts won't be. And good practices make them visible to the rest of the business. So that's definitely how having a good set of IT workflows will help you to overcome your debt, but also to stop you accruing more of it.
And for the rest of the business, are there any other solutions businesses should be striving to realise alongside those IT workflows that would complement that as well?
I always think that anything customer facing, although it sounds obvious, we should always be listening to our customers and understanding the voice of our customers and making sure we have mechanisms that are good to get feedback from our customers. As I mentioned before, having that voice of the customer and being able to understand whether there is this sense of frustration from them really does make a difference to understanding which of your debt is kind of high interest debt and which is less, had a different interest rate on it. If you were paying back a financial loan, you've got two loans and one's at 20% and one's at 5%, then, you pay the 20% one off first. And having good customer facing solutions and good feedback from your customers helps you understand which of your technical debt is high interest.
And we've talked today about how to diagnose and identify technical debt, how to overcome it. And of course, just with financial debt, there's always that danger of slipping back into the old ways in the future again. So how can organisations proactively avoid ever spiralling into even more technical debt in the future, would you say?
Yeah, so that point about paying the high interest debt back first is really good. Yeah. And there's a couple of things that you can do depending on your organisation and your structure and your preferred ways of working that it can help you reduce that. So one simple one is what's known as the Boy Scout rule. So the Boy Scout rule, if you were camping and you're a Boy Scout, then the rule is you always leave the campsite in a better condition than when you left it. And you can embed that same principle into your software developers. So if a software developer is touching a piece of code for some particular reason to add a new feature, then they should always try to leave that bit of code in a better state than when they found it, which means they should try and fix some of the technical debt as they go along, as they see it. So if they identify something that they can fix as part of the work they're doing to build the new feature or to fix some other defect, then they should do it up to a threshold. So there are some things which they'll identify and go, well, that's going to double the amount of time I've got available to work on this thing. So they probably should log those as some sort of defect or make a note of that as some technical debt to address another time. But if it's a smaller thing that they can fix within a threshold of the work they had planned, then they should do that. And building that culture into your organization is a simple way to try to keep that debt manageable. But there's also some other things. I think generally, in the same way with financial debt, it's a bit of a taboo subject, but talking about it is good. Make it a terminology that you're discussing with your teams. Make sure that when you're talking about other things, then there is some discussion on the debt that might accrue. Whenever you're speaking to agile teams, there are certain bits of terminology you hear all the time: sprints, stories, backlog. But technical debt is, although it's a key principle of things like Agile Scrum, it's not something that gets talked about as much. And actually, I think it's really, really important. So with my development teams, I actually get them to rigidly allocate space in their sprints for technical debt. So we might have 60% of the development might be new features. We might have 20% that is defect fixing. And then we might have 20% specifically set aside for paying down technical debt, refactoring some code, or making some changes that will mean that we are either reducing our technical debt or we are stopping us from accruing anymore in that particular area.
Well, I cannot thank you enough for helping everyone listening today to certainly get a better grasp on how they can get out of technical debt. And before I let you go, though, I always like to ask my guests to leave the listeners with a personal touch of inspiration by sharing either a book that has inspired them in their career or maybe a go-to song where they need to get their head in the zone or before they go on stage to deliver a keynote. So the final question for you is, what were you going to leave us with today? And is there a story to accompany your choice?
Oh, well, I could probably think of several great suggestions. I would say on the point of we've been discussing today, then the book Essential Scrum by Kenneth Rubin, as far as I'm concerned, is the de facto book on Agile Scrum. And everyone, if it's not in that book, you probably don't need to know about it. But so that's a quick work one to get out of the way. I think if I was trying to get my head in the zone and was about to go on stage, I would probably pick something like The Power by Duke Dumont. That's a tune I was listening to recently that kind of G's me up for exercise or for something that was coming. So that would be my suggestion.
Fantastic. Two great choices there. I'll add the song to the Spotify playlist and I'll also add the book to our Amazon wish list. But finally, before I let you go, can you just remind anyone listening where they can find you online, contact your team if they've got any questions, etc., or just find out more information about anything that we talked about today?
Yeah, so the best place is to go to the Fujitsu.com website. So you can go to Fujitsu.com/ServiceNow to get to our ServiceNow specific pages. Loads of great information on there and ways to contact us on any subject related to Agile or to ServiceNow or any other questions you might have.
Well, as I said a few moments ago, cannot thank you enough for coming on here and talking about diagnosing the symptoms and the solutions of technical debt and leaving us with a great song and a great book too. So I'd love to stay in touch with you and see how this journey's going, but more than anything, thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
Thanks for inviting me on. It's been great. Thanks.
I genuinely hope that today's conversation that explored the main traits of technical debt has played a small part in raising awareness amongst leaders who often fail to recognise the symptoms of technical debt that are in their own business. And if anything did resonate with you today, I really do urge you to reach out and contact them because this really is something that they have vast experience in. And I know it's a topic close to Carey's heart. You've heard from me today, you've heard from Carey, and I want to put the microphone in your direction. I want you to share your insights, your experiences with technical debt and get some of those stories shared on this podcast too. And as always, I'm the easiest guy in the world to get hold of. You can email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. You get me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. Just look for @NeilC.Hughes. Send me a quick DM there. Let me know what you thought of today's episode. And equally, if you'd like to work with me or browse through nearly 2,000 interviews, pop over to my website, techblogwriter.co.uk, and we'll keep this conversation going. But that's it for today's episode. So I will return again tomorrow. We already have another guest lined up and we'll discuss another area in life, business and our world that is being transformed by technology. We'll demystify it along the way. I cordially invite you to join me again. But a big thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.